Hey YouTube, how you guys doing? My name is Kyle, you know me as Dragonmar, and welcome to a new video. Today we're going to be going over 10 tips before you play ranked, and these are going to range from just general sort of insight into ranked play, as well as some specific tips, and just sort of things that you should be prepared for before you start playing ranked, which is the key here. I know a lot of us are guilty of going into ranked modes in games a little bit too early, and it often costs us our rank. So I thought, why not make a video on this and hopefully give you guys a little bit of good advice for those of you who maybe still haven't delved into ranked yet. And to start things off, I just want to give a quick tip for every class, almost as if someone was to ask me, who is a DPS and a support, a tank player, all asked me, just give me one quick tip. Here's what I would say. So for DPS players, I would always recommend you try to take the high ground and look to finish off low health targets. One of the worst things that new DPS players do is they get distracted by high HP targets like tanks in particular. Now for supports, I would always tell them to stick with your tanks and try to look for the player on your team who seems to be doing the most, and maybe try pocketing them if that's possible. And for tanks, I would say to always stay with your team if you can, obviously if it's not like snipers, but I would always look for your main support and just stick with them. A lot of cases when you're starting off, the tanks are the ones that have to help the supports the most, and if you help the support helps you. It kind of works out really nice. Now let's get started with the tips, and tip number one is make sure you learn the maps and the heroes first. This is a big one for a lot of new players, and you often see people frustrated with the ranks they get, but when you ask them if they took the time to get to know like even the game at all, a lot of the times the answer is no. They just hit whatever level 25 and immediately went into ranked. It's a big thing to understand heroes, at the very least just understanding what they do in each ability. You don't have to master them, you don't have to even play them, just know what they do so you can expect what the enemy is going to do in your games. But also learning the maps is important too. You don't want to be caught off guard multiple times in a game because you didn't know where to look or sort of how to access a certain point, in particular things like high ground. Now tip number two is that you are not good enough when you first start playing Overwatch to carry your games on your own. And the few people that are good enough probably aren't going to watch this video. So with that being said, you need to just immediately erase that out of your mind and think about working more as a team instead of playing solo. Third, I would say that shields are huge in the low ranks, and in particular shields are really good for people who maybe aren't so confident in their movement yet. If you do have a shield tank on your team, or you are the shield tank, just, make sure that you are behind the shield at all times. There's almost no reason for people to walk in front of shields, and a lot of the times you may tunnel vision, so just keep that in mind and make sure that you are positioning yourself, or if you're the tank, you're positioning your shield in a way where your team can get the most use out of it. Number four is sort of interesting and maybe a bit more higher in thought and technique, but learning to use line of sight to your advantage is really big. So the easiest example is to say to never walk in a straight line, because anyone with a line of sight on you, anyone who can see you essentially, is going to have an easy headshot on you. And line of sight generally refers to what you can see from a certain place. So if an enemy is staring down a hallway, that is sort of their line of sight. If you walk in front of the hallway, you go into their line of sight. So using cover, in particular environmental cover, to shield yourself from different kinds of LOS, like a diva bomb. So if diva bomb goes off, you can just walk behind a car and you'll be safe. So that is an example of how to use LOS in your favor. Another really important thing is in different kinds of doorways, you can sort of position yourself to allow yourself to be healed by teammates, but also be safe from enemies. So always keep in mind where you're standing, where your team is, and where your enemy is. Number five is something that's sort of changed over time, especially with role queue, but using a smaller hero pool now is a little more valuable, I think. Before, I would suggest you kind of knew at least one of each class. That's not really necessary anymore. You can queue up into whatever role you want, and you really only need like 3 heroes in that class to be effective. I would always suggest using something, or at least using one, or knowing one hero who is a little bit different than the others. This is sort of going to guarantee that you have a viable switch, but Yeah, you really only need 3 nowadays, which is it's kind of it's definitely an interesting change, but I think it's going to help a lot of people sort of get to a higher rank in their given role. Now, number 6 is that you should always look to regroup rather than trying to be a hero. This is a little bit trickier for newer players because they have to sort of focus on the kill feed a little more and making sure who's alive, etc. So tracking deaths and things like that is important, but just sort of look around, and if you notice most of your team dead, it's really important that you just get away, because one of the worst things you can do, and what a lot of people do, is they sort of trickle in and just feed ult charge to the enemy, and that's just never really a good thing. So you always want to try to avoid that when possible, and always look to stick with your team and regroup with them rather than just running in and dying for no reason. Now, number 7 comes into play with knowing multiple heroes, and it's that you should always swap if you feel like you're countered, but only swap if you're actually comfortable playing that other hero. Never ever switch to something that you have no experience on in ranked. It's just never a good idea, and you're most likely going to do even worse. And this is also something that your hero pool kind of grows over time. The more you play quick play, etc., things like that, the more you'll learn more heroes. And it's kind of one of those things, when you start, you only know so much. But just remember that sometimes swapping to something you're not comfortable on is even worse than playing what's getting countered. Number 8 is that you should always look to combine your ultimate with your team if possible, and also remembering not to ult on cooldown. So generally, things like Zarya's Grav Bomb, you want to combo that with something, unless you have good teamwork. But on the flip side, not ulting off of cooldown, as soon as you get it, essentially, you wanna wait. And this is really important for support players. Someone like a Zenyatta, if the other team has a Genji, your role as a Zenyatta is to get your ult before him and wait for him to use his blade. And that's literally it. So keeping these sort of things in mind, I think, is really important to sort of getting the most out of your ultimates. But you do have to be mindful, and you don't want to wait too long. But that's a story for another day. Number 9 is to use high ground whenever you can. Now, it's really important for this to understand maps and their layouts and how they work. But once you do, learning how to take high ground and sort of how to control it is really, really, really important for new players. Because a lot of the time, if you hold high ground effectively, the enemy team is going to struggle just unbelievably to take it back from you. And I'll give one of the main reasons this is important. It's because you can use the ledges and the different angles you have when looking down to shield yourself naturally from shots. Well, when you're on low ground, you don't have that option unless you're pushing like a payload. So there's just infinitely more cover when you have high ground. And finally, tip number 10 is to just play each game to learn. It's really important that when you are starting off, that you are looking at each game as a learning experience and just trying to, improve. It's not something that's going to be easy, but if you do put the time in to sort of understand why you lost certain games or why certain fights were won, things like that, I think it's really important, and it helps people improve quicker. This happens at all ranks. Even top 500 players need to constantly critique and look over their gameplay, maybe go over replays, things like that. But I think that this is one of the most important ones for people who are serious about growing and getting better at the game. And with that being said, guys, I just want to say thanks so much for watching the video. Look out for some more in the future. I hopefully will be making some more really soon. And thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Have a great new year, and take it easy, and peace.